Rimuru, the hero copycat by RimuruEdward6. Hawks Pav. I'd just settled back into the chair, letting the pieces of Rimuru's nightmare and the possible connection to All for One swirl in my head, when her voice cut through the stillness again. It was soft, barely above a whisper, and filled with a vulnerability I'd never heard from her before. Hawks, she mumbled, her voice shaky but earnest. When I was 6, you saved me, from him. I sat up straighter, my heart skipping a beat as her words sank in. I promise, she continued, her tone soft but resolute, one day. I'll do the same for you. You're the reason I got a life worth fighting for. Her face relaxed slightly, a faint smile tugging at her lips as she added, you'll always be my favorite hero. I felt my chest tighten, her words hitting me harder than I expected. I stared at her sleeping form, the weight of her emotions pressing down on me. She'd never said anything like this before. She always carried herself like she didn't need anyone, like she could handle everything on her own. But now, hearing this, she'd been through so much more than she ever let on. And somehow, in all of that, she saw me as the reason she found a life worth living. I ran a hand through my hair, exhaling slowly. Rimuru, I muttered under my breath, my voice barely audible. You don't owe me anything. You're the one who's fighting, not me. But her words stayed with me. Saved her when she was 6. From him. My mind went to the nightmare again, to her fear of All for One, and a cold realization settled over me. If All for One really was her father, and I'd been the one to pull her out of his grasp. No wonder she carried so much. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees as I watched her sleep. You don't need to save me, Rimuru, I said softly, even though she couldn't hear me. But I'll make sure you never have to fight him alone. Her faint smile remained, and for a moment, I let myself hope she'd found some peace, even in sleep. She deserved that much, at least. Her quiet murmuring continued, and I couldn't help but lean closer, straining to catch the words she wasn't aware she was saying. You're funny, she mumbled softly, her voice carrying a hint of warmth even in her sleep. Warm, and I might have had a fangirl moment or two. I blinked, her admission catching me completely off guard. Not that I'd ever want to tell you, she added quickly, her tone turning almost playful. Your ego's big enough as it is. I couldn't help the smirk that spread across my face. You've got a point there, Rimuru, I muttered under my breath, trying not to laugh and risk waking her. But, she continued, her voice softening, I think, it's just part of your charm. Never change. The room fell quiet again, her words hanging in the air like an unintentional confession. For a moment, I just sat there, letting her words settle. Rimuru, the stoic, fiercely independent hero who rarely let anyone in, thought of me as funny and warm. She'd even admitted to fangirling, well, sort of. I leaned back in the chair, a faint chuckle escaping me as I ran a hand through my hair. Rimuru, you're full of surprises, I said softly. But there was something about her words that stuck with me, something that went beyond the humor of the moment. For all her strength and resilience, she saw me as someone she could count on, someone she trusted enough to let her guard down, even if it was only in her sleep. Never change, huh? I murmured, my smirk softening into a smile. All right, Rimuru. I'll do my best. Because if there was one thing I'd learned from being around her, it was that people like Rimuru didn't come into your life often. And when they did, you made damn sure you didn't let them down. I leaned back in the chair, letting the silence of the room settle around me. Rimuru's quiet breaths were the only sound, her earlier words replaying in my mind like a recording I couldn't turn off. Funny, warm, never change. A small smile tugged at my lips as I watched her, her usually sharp features softened by sleep. She looked peaceful, almost fragile, an image so different from the unstoppable hero I'd come to know. It was strange, really. I'd always thought of Rimuru as someone who carried the weight of the world on her shoulders, someone who refused to let anyone see just how much it weighed on her. And yet, here she was, mumbling in her sleep about fangirling and charm, as if the crushing burden she bore was a distant memory. She trusted me enough to be here, to let her guard down, even if she'd probably deny it the second she woke up. And that trust. It meant more than I could put into words. Rimuru, I murmured softly, leaning forward and resting my elbows on my knees, you've been through so much, haven't you? I thought about everything she'd said, her nightmares, her fears, the weight of her past. She was fighting so hard to protect everyone, to keep people safe, and in doing so, she was isolating herself from the very connections she needed. It was heartbreaking, and it pissed me off. You don't have to do this alone, you know, I said quietly, even though she couldn't hear me. You've got people who care about you. People who want to help. I let out a slow breath, running a hand through my hair. She'd probably laugh it off if I told her any of this. She'd make some quip about how she didn't need anyone, how she could handle it all on her own. But that didn't mean it wasn't true. You're strong, Rimuru, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Stronger than anyone I've ever met. But even you have limits. I glanced at her again, her face relaxed, her breathing steady. The faintest hint of a smile lingered on her lips, as if even in sleep, she'd found some small shred of peace. And maybe, just maybe, she was starting to realize she didn't have to carry everything by herself. You're worth it, I said softly, a quiet promise to myself. Whatever it takes, I'll make sure you see that. Because if there was one thing I knew for sure, it was that Rimuru wasn't just a hero. She was a person, a stubborn, complicated, incredible person, and she deserved more than the weight she carried. And I wasn't going to let her forget it. I leaned back in the chair, my gaze drifting to the small bag Rimuru had brought with her. It sat on the floor near the couch, looking far too light for someone who was supposedly living out of it. Curiosity got the better of me. I reached down and gently opened it, careful not to make a sound. Inside, I found only a single set of extra clothes, nothing else. No toiletries, no money, none of the essentials you'd expect from someone who claimed she'd been staying in inns and hotels. My brow furrowed. How does she? I muttered, trailing off as the pieces started to fall into place. She lied. She didn't stay at inns or hotels. She'd made that up to make me feel better about her crashing at my place. I rummaged a bit more and found an old-school flip phone, one that looked like it could have been bought for a couple of bucks at a convenience store, and a small pouch. Inside the pouch was her hero license, along with a handful of other ID cards. I flipped through them, my confusion growing with each one. A medical ID. A government clearance pass. An engineering certification. They were all real. Every single one. What the hell? I muttered, sitting back as I processed what I was looking at. Rimuru wasn't just a hero, she'd been working multiple jobs, and from the looks of it, she was good at all of them. But if that was true, then where was her money? Hero work paid well enough, and with credentials like these, she should have been living comfortably. So why did it seem like she had nothing? I glanced over at her sleeping form, the questions piling up in my mind. Was she giving her money away? Funding something off the books? Or was there another reason entirely, one she hadn't let anyone in on? Rimuru, I said softly, shaking my head. What are you doing? She was full of secrets, that much was clear. But this one felt different. It wasn't just about protecting herself or hiding from all for one, this was something deeper, something personal. I carefully put everything back into the bag and sat back, my mind racing. I didn't know what she was up to, but I was going to find out. Not because I didn't trust her, but because whatever this was, it was hurting her. And I wasn't going to let her carry it alone. Whatever you're hiding, I said quietly, glancing back at her, you don't have to do it by yourself. She might think she had to keep everything locked away, but I wasn't about to let her shut me out, not when she needed someone in her corner. And not when I could be the one to help. Hawks Pav. The next morning, I didn't waste time. The questions from the night before were eating away at me, and I needed answers. Rimuru was sitting on the couch, her bag beside her, looking a little more composed but still tired. Morning, I said casually, pouring myself a cup of coffee. Sleep okay? Yeah, she replied, though her tone was clipped. She was still guarded, like she always was when she thought someone might get too close. I set my mug down and leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. So, I've been wondering, you said you stay at hotels and inns. How are you affording them if you don't have any money in your bag? Her eyes flicked to me, and I saw her stiffen just slightly. Money's at school, she said, her voice hesitant, her words almost robotic. It wasn't just a bad lie, it was a terrible lie. Even someone who didn't know her would have seen right through it. Rimuru, I said, my tone steady but firm, you're a lot of things, but a bad liar isn't usually one of them. What's really going on? She hesitated, her golden eyes darting to her bag before settling on the floor. It's nothing, she muttered. Just forget it. But I couldn't let it go. Not this time. Does this have to do with all for one? I asked, my voice quieter now but no less serious. The moment the words left my mouth, it was like I'd hit a switch. Her face went pale, and her hands clenched into fists. She didn't say anything at first, but her breathing grew uneven, her entire body tense as if she were preparing for the worst. Rimuru, I said gently, stepping closer. Hey, it's okay. I'm not accusing you of anything, I just want to understand. She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes as she finally spoke, her voice trembling. You think I'm like him, don't you? She said, barely above a whisper. You think I'm a threat. What? I said, completely taken aback. Rimuru, no. I didn't choose this. She cried, her voice breaking. I didn't ask to have a quirk like his, or to be connected to him. I've done everything I can to stay away, to be better, but it's never enough, is it? People will always look at me and see him. She broke down then, tears streaming down her face as she buried her head in her hands. I froze for a second, unsure of what to do. I'd never seen her like this, so raw, so vulnerable. But then I stepped forward, crouching in front of her. Rimuru, I said softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. Look at me. She didn't move at first, but eventually, she lifted her head, her golden eyes red and puffy. I don't think you're like him, I said firmly. Not even a little. You're nothing like all for one, Rimuru. You're the furthest thing from him. She sniffled, looking at me like she didn't quite believe me. You've been carrying this by yourself for so long, I continued, my voice steady. But you don't have to. I'm here. All Might's here. We're not going anywhere, no matter what you're afraid of. She blinked, fresh tears spilling over as she tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. It's okay, I said, pulling her into a gentle hug. She stiffened at first, but then she melted into it, clinging to me like her life depended on it. You're not alone, Rimuru, I whispered. Not anymore. And in that moment, I swore to myself that I'd do whatever it took to make sure she never felt this way again. She pulled back slightly, wiping at her red and puffy eyes, her breathing still shaky as she finally began to speak. I can't earn money, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm too young for a paycheck. I've lived like this for years. Her words hit me like a brick. Rimuru, I said softly, leaning closer, what do you mean? You've been working, hero work pays well. How? I don't get paid, she interrupted, her voice trembling but firm. The jobs I do, they just give me food and drinks. That's it. I stared at her, my mind racing to process what she was saying. For years. She nodded, her golden eyes glistening with unshed tears. The phone was a gift from Izuku. The clothes in this bag. She gestured weakly at the worn items near her. They're from free clothing shops. I've just been getting by. I sat back, the weight of her words settling over me like a storm cloud. For all her strength, for all the power and poise she carried as a hero, Rimuru had been surviving, not living. How? Why didn't you say anything? I asked, my voice softer now. She gave me a weak smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. I didn't want anyone to worry. Heroes are supposed to take care of people, not the other way around. I let out a sharp breath, running a hand through my hair. Rimuru, that's not how this works. You're not alone in this. You've got people who care about you, me, All Might, Izuku. We would have helped. Her gaze dropped to the floor. I didn't want to be a burden, she said quietly. I crouched in front of her again, forcing her to look at me. You're not a burden, I said firmly. You've been doing more for everyone else than anyone has a right to ask of you. It's time someone took care of you for a change. She looked at me, her golden eyes searching mine for any sign of insincerity. When she found none, she let out a shaky breath and nodded. Okay, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Good, I said, giving her a small smile. Because I'm not letting you go back to living like that. You deserve better, Rimuru. Way better. For the first time, she smiled back, small and hesitant, but real. And in that moment, I made another promise to myself. I'd make sure Rimuru never had to just get by again. The tension in the room eased slightly as Rimuru's breathing steadied, her earlier breakdown finally giving way to a calm, if fragile, quiet. She wiped at her face again, trying to regain her composure. But then, as I reached for my coffee to give her a moment, I heard her mumble something under her breath. My hero. I froze, my cup halfway to my lips. What was that? I asked, raising an eyebrow with the most casual grin I could manage. Her eyes widened immediately, a faint blush creeping onto her cheeks. Wait, I didn't say that, she blurted out, her voice an octave higher than usual. You didn't hear that. That never happened. I smirked, leaning back and crossing my arms. Oh, it definitely happened, I teased, watching as her face turned an even deeper shade of red. You just called me your hero, didn't you? No, she said quickly, shaking her head so fast her hair nearly covered her face. I mean, maybe you misheard. Or imagined it. Or. I laughed, cutting her off. Relax, Rimuru. It's not a big deal. She glared at me, her flustered state only making her look more endearing. It is a big deal. You're already insufferable enough without giving you more reasons to gloat. Me. Gloat. I said, feigning offense. I'd never. She crossed her arms, clearly not buying it, but the faint blush remained, and I couldn't help but find her reaction amusing. Fine, she muttered, looking away. Maybe I said something. But don't let it go to your head. Too late, I said with a grin. But seriously, Rimuru, I'll take it as a compliment. You don't hand those out easily. Her glare softened slightly, though she still looked annoyed. You're impossible, she muttered, but there was a faint smile tugging at her lips. Maybe, I replied, leaning back again. But I'm your impossible, apparently. She groaned, burying her face in her hands, and I couldn't help but laugh. In a way, it was nice to see this side of her, the side that let her guard down, even if it was just for a moment. She'd been through so much, but here, she could just be herself. And if teasing her a little helped lighten the load, I'd gladly play along. Don't worry, Rimuru, I said, my tone playful but sincere. Your secret's safe with me. Rimuru's groan of frustration turned into quiet muttering, and I leaned forward slightly, trying to catch what she was saying. Why couldn't it just happen with Izuku instead? She mumbled, more to herself than to me. He fanboys about All Might and every other hero all the time. I could have downplayed it so much easier with him. I smirked, unable to resist poking a little fun. Oh, so I'm the problem now. Her head snapped up, her golden eyes wide with panic. I didn't. You weren't supposed to hear that. Too late, I said with a laugh, thoroughly enjoying how flustered she was getting. And for the record, I'm honored that you think so highly of me. Even if you'd rather have slipped up with Izuku. She groaned again, burying her face in her hands. This is so embarrassing, she muttered, her voice muffled. Relax, Rimuru, I said, trying to keep my tone light. You're overthinking this. It's not a big deal. She peeked at me through her fingers, her glare only slightly intimidating thanks to the blush still staining her cheeks. It is a big deal. You're already unbearable, and now you have even more to tease me about. Maybe, I admitted with a grin. But if it makes you feel better, I'll try not to bring it up too often. Her groan of annoyance turned into a quiet laugh, and she finally dropped her hands, shaking her head. You're impossible. Maybe, I said, leaning back in my chair. But come on, Rimuru, admit it. This is way more fun than trying to downplay it with Izuku. She rolled her eyes, but the faint smile on her lips told me she wasn't too mad. I'm never living this down, am I? Not a chance, I said, laughing. And for a moment, the weight she usually carried seemed just a little lighter. Hawk's paw. Rimuru groaned, clearly at her limit, before throwing her hands up in exasperation. Fine, she said, her voice sharp but tinged with resignation. You want the truth. I leaned forward, intrigued and, honestly, a little amused. Lay it on me. She crossed her arms, glaring at me, but the blush on her cheeks betrayed the frustration she was trying to project. I've idolized you since I was 6, okay. She said, her words spilling out like a confession she'd been holding back for years. That caught me off guard. My favorite fighting style. It's yours, she continued, her voice gaining strength as she kept going. At school, when they asked which hero I'd want as a teacher, I told them your name. Every single time. I blinked, trying to process the flood of admissions. You're the coolest, funniest, and friendliest hero I know, she went on, her golden eyes glaring at me, daring me to make fun of her. And you're always there when I need a hero. That's the truth. The room fell silent for a moment, her words hanging in the air. I stared at her, completely taken aback. Rimuru, I said slowly, a grin starting to spread across my face, I had no idea you thought so highly of me. She groaned, burying her face in her hands again. I knew this was a bad idea. Your ego's going to be insufferable after this. I laughed, shaking my head. Rimuru, I'm not going to tease you about this. She peeked at me through her fingers, her expression doubtful. You're not. Nope, I said, my tone genuine. Because, honestly, that's probably the nicest thing anyone's ever said about me. Her eyes widened, her hands slowly dropping as she processed my words. I mean it, I said, leaning forward. You're one of the toughest, smartest people I've ever met, and hearing that I've been an inspiration to you. That means a lot, Rimuru. More than I can say. She blinked, clearly caught off guard, before a faint smile tugged at her lips. You're serious. Dead serious, I said, giving her a warm smile. And for the record, I think you're pretty amazing too. You've got more guts and heart than most people twice your age. Don't forget that. Her blush deepened, but this time, she didn't hide it. Instead, she let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. You really are impossible, Hawks. Maybe, I said with a grin, but apparently, I'm also your favorite hero. She rolled her eyes, but the smile on her face stayed. And for the first time in a long while, it felt like she was letting herself breathe. Rimuru exhaled deeply, leaning back against the couch as if the weight of the world had just shifted slightly off her shoulders. She glanced at me, her golden eyes uncertain, but then she squared her shoulders. Well, she began, her voice quieter now, I guess if I'm already on a confession streak, there's something else you should know. I tilted my head, watching her carefully. Go on. She hesitated for a moment, then sighed. My quirk. It's not as limited as it's registered in the books. That caught my attention immediately. What do you mean? I asked, leaning forward. She avoided my gaze, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of the blanket draped over her lap. The official version, the limits, the 1 quirk at a time thing, the 5-second intervals. All of it's fake. I made those restrictions up. I blinked, processing her words. Why? She looked at me then, her eyes heavy with the weight of her answer. Because if my quirk was registered as it really is, it would have set off 1,000 red flags. People would have noticed how similar it is to All for One's. I felt my stomach twist at the mention of him, but I stayed quiet, letting her continue. Even with those fake limits, the resemblance is close enough to make me nervous, she admitted. The truth is, my database is endless. I can recall multiple quirks at once, not just one, and those intervals between switching. Completely made up. Her words hung in the air, the weight of her confession settling between us. So, I said slowly, trying to piece it all together, you've been hiding your real abilities this whole time to avoid being associated with him. She nodded. Yeah, I didn't want people to look at me and think, she's just like All for One. I didn't want to give anyone a reason to doubt me or to fear me. So, I hid it. I sat back, running a hand through my hair. Rimuru, that's a lot. She let out a bitter laugh. You don't say. But, I added, leaning forward again, it also makes a lot of sense. You've been carrying this fear for so long, trying to protect yourself from something you didn't even choose. Her gaze dropped to the floor. It's not just about me, she said quietly. If people knew, they might start asking questions, about my past, about why my quirk is the way it is. And if they dug deep enough, they'd figure it out. I can't let that happen. I nodded slowly, my respect for her growing even more. You've been handling this all on your own, I said softly. But you don't have to anymore. You've got people who care about you, me, All Might, Izuku. We're not going to let you face this alone. She glanced up at me, her eyes shining with something between relief and doubt. You mean that? Every word, I said firmly. For a moment, she looked like she might argue, but then she sighed and nodded. Okay, she said softly. Thanks, Hawks. I gave her a grin. Don't mention it. And hey, just so you know, fake limits or not, your quirk's incredible. But what makes you amazing isn't just your power. It's you. Her cheeks flushed slightly, but she didn't look away this time. Instead, she smiled, a small, genuine smile that told me I'd said the right thing. And in that moment, I knew she'd taken her first real step toward trusting someone with the truth. Rimuru let out a long sigh, leaning back into the couch and pulling the blanket tighter around her. For once, she didn't look like the world was sitting squarely on her shoulders. You know, she started, her tone almost light, one positive aspect to this whole mess that is my life. I raised an eyebrow, waiting for her to continue. I got a pep talk, she said, counting on her fingers. Got to sleep. Got to work. And even got a compliment from my favorite hero. She glanced at me briefly, her golden eyes flashing with the faintest hint of amusement. Not many people can say that, she added, a small smile tugging at her lips. I chuckled, crossing my arms. True. Most people would have to work a lot harder to earn all that. She snorted softly, shaking her head. I know Izuku would have a heart attack by now if he got to do all that stuff with all might. Her words hung in the air for a moment, and then her eyes widened in horror as she realized what she'd just said. Oh no, she muttered, sitting up straight and waving her hands in a panic. Forget I said that. I didn't mean, just forget it. I couldn't help but laugh. So, I'm your favorite hero, huh? She groaned, burying her face in her hands. This is why I don't talk about feelings. Relax, I said, grinning as I leaned forward. I'm not gonna let you live it down, but I won't tell anyone. Scout's honor. She peeked at me through her fingers, her expression torn between annoyance and amusement. You're impossible, she muttered, but there was no heat in her words. Maybe, I replied, leaning back with a smirk. But I'm also your favorite hero, so I'm allowed to be. She groaned again, but the faint smile that crept onto her face told me she wasn't as mad as she wanted to seem. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like she was letting herself enjoy the moment.